We appreciate the USA 500 Club allowing us to provide this practicum on divorce dynamics in COVID-19. This has been quite the ordeal. So good morning to everyone. Welcome to today's practicum. We have a wonderful presentation plan with live cases and input by two amazing professionals. I'm Jonathan Gassman, aka JG. I am the CEO and founder of a third-generation financial planning firm here in Midtown Manhattan, even though I'm in Florida today. And our area focuses on high net worth planning for executives and business owners. We're joined by my esteemed colleagues, Karen Platt. Karen is a partner in the law group of Pryor Cashman, and she has extensive experience in negotiating and litigating a wide range of matrimonial law issues, including, among other things, prenups, postnups, custody, support issues, as well as dealing with what we'll talk about today a bit is the complex asset distribution issues. What also makes Karen kind of unique is not only is she a lawyer, but she's a trained mediator and a collaborative lawyer. So somebody really good to have in your pocket. By way, also, it's worth me sharing, Karen's background. She was a financial representative at one of the major investment houses. So she's got quite a bit of financial savvy and experience in dealing with matrimonial issues from a financial standpoint as well. So quite an interesting combination and very helpful in these types of cases. My second esteemed panelist is Avni Ramnani. Everybody knows her as one of the leaders of the Midtown West group for the USA 500 Club. She is a director of financial planning and wealth management at Francis Financial, another boutique registered investment advisory firm in New York City. And her area of focus is on women in transition. Very, very focused, narrowed, and she brings a breadth and depth of knowledge in the financial management side where she provides financial strategy as well as planning and combining the different elements of financial planning, such as investments, insurance, estate, tax, cash flow, into a plan for a client, helping them bridge the gap of where they are versus where they want to be, and hopefully putting them on the right track going forward. So we have really two amazing, amazing people with us today. When we think about what's going on in the world, even the most seasoned family matrimonial lawyers with decades of experience thought that they had seen everything from financial recessions, bear markets, real estate crashes that have slowed how justices work. And now we're dealing with COVID, which is creating the new norm. And today we'll focus on a variety of issues through case studies, as you can see here on the screen. Talk a little bit about custody and what's going on and what's transpiring, dealing with the court system. It's been closed for a while, and dealing with property and support issues, the hottest topics in the arena as we talk about this. Any comments or thoughts, Karen and Avni?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to be here and to talk to everybody today. And you'll be really excited to learn that Avni and I have all of the answers. We know everything. So the practical reality is we'll talk through a couple of scenarios which we've created based on some of the experiences that Avni and I have been having in the last few months. We're all in this brainstorming phase of trying to figure out what the issues are, how those issues can be resolved today, how they might be resolved in 2 weeks or in a month or in 6 months. We started working on these scenarios a month and a half ago, and as we were putting them together, I was in one mindset, and then as we started recapping to prepare again for today, I feel like everything's changed even in the last 6 weeks again. And there's new issues, I'm looking longer term at issues. So we'll talk through that, and hopefully then at the end we'll have a a little discussion and take some questions. And I'm sure each of you, I know that a lot of the people who are on this call are also family law practitioners. I know a lot of the folks here in New York, and I think there's some New England-based people as well. And I'll be really curious to get some input from you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Avni.
Yeah, just quickly, I think in terms of timeframes too, everyone's so focused on the now that it's difficult.
Avni, can you lean closer to your microphone? You're not particularly loud.
Oh, okay. So, is this better?
A little bit.
Okay. So, the other thing that has been on at least my mind is how are these issues being addressed today? And then what effect that might have and decisions around these issues that you take might have in the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, because they will. And with everything going on right now, we're so focused on now that it's difficult to look ahead and think about these issues in terms of the longer term. So hopefully we'll pinpoint some good issues for you to observe in the cases you're handling.
So let's take apart a case. Let's look at a case together and come up with ideas of what observations each of you have. Here's a fact pattern. We have Dr. Marcella and King David. They've been married for 12 years together. Unfortunately or fortunately, they decided it was time to split. So last fall in November of 2019, boom, Marcella files for divorce. Marcella, by way of background, she's a physician, she's a pediatrician. She has a minority interest, you could say, in a pediatric medical group. She owns 25%, and her husband, David, is an IT manager for a large company handling all different aspects. They have 2 kids between them, 9 and 7. And unfortunately, one of the kids, the youngest, their daughter has asthma. So the big issues, or some additional facts, David, he's very concerned about their daughter's health, being that Dr. Marcella is in constant exposure and risk to COVID-19 to her work. He's got a lot of issues, and he tells Marcella that she cannot see the kids. She cannot see the kids because of COVID, and he wants her out. And the other issue is, Marcella, she's got a medical practice. She's got an equity interest of 25% in the business. And, the question is, how do we determine the value? So let's banter around a little bit, Karen and Avni, what you're seeing in this fact pattern. What pops up? What pops out at you two?
Yeah, sure. I'll tackle it first, as I'm looking primarily at the custody issues. Avni will weigh in a little bit more on the asset-related issues. This is something that we've seen time and again, and we've heard these stories, we've read them in the papers about parents who are in disagreement around access during this crisis. This is one reason why a parent has said, oh, my spouse or soon-to-be ex-spouse shouldn't see the kids because the kids are at risk. And the questions that come to my mind are, can we trust that Marcella would take appropriate precautions, would be obviously being protective of her own health and being protective of her children's health? And what puts David in a position, if anything, where he's got a superior right to say that there should be some limits on the restriction? One question that this fact pattern doesn't really present is whether, so the parties are living separate, we know that since last fall, but we don't know if they have had an agreement or a court order that sets out from when they separated last fall until a few months ago what the access schedule was. Are there rules that they were following? And were those rules written, or were they just sort of by default? This is the schedule we're following. What's been challenging for us as lawyers is that, as JG alluded to, access to the courts has been really limited. So if I were representing Marcella and David is saying, I'm not going to let you see the kids, what's my recourse? For a long period of time, the courts were just simply closed. Then they've reopened to hear just emergency matters. If we have a situation, this does say that Marcella had filed for divorce last November, but if she didn't have a judge assigned to her case yet, it would not have been easy to get one assigned. And even as the courts have reopened, they started permitting in New York new filings, new matters to be filed at the end of May. We're finding that the courts are just not accessible. I was telling JG and Avni yesterday that last week I had what I will truly consider one of the most severe emergencies of my practice that I've encountered. And I was forced to file an emergency motion demanding that the ex-husband return the daughter to my client, the ex-wife. I filed that motion last Monday as an emergency in New York County, in the court where we've done other post-judgment litigation, and first requested a conference call with the judge who'd heard the last motion in this case. She denied our request for a conference call, forcing us to file the motion. And as of this morning, we're now 8 days later, that motion is still sitting in the clerk's office, marked as an emergency, not having gotten to the judge. So the judge cannot conference the issue with me. We have no access to justice at this point. So we're left really with these situations to work them out on our own. We have gotten general guidance from our courts in New York, including an op-ed piece from one of our matrimonial judges in the Law Journal, essentially saying parties need to be aware that if they think they just can exert their own power and violate agreements and orders during this crisis, that it's going to come back to bite them, and everybody has to act fairly towards each other.
Yeah.
But when you have Marcella and David who don't agree on what's fair and what's right, and David thinks he's doing the right thing, protecting their daughter who has asthma, and Marcella thinks she's doing the right thing by taking all of the precautions that the government requires and that with her medical training she knows are appropriate. Who's right here? In my emergency situation, what we wound up doing was going to a mediator. And it's a retired judge who basically told the ex-husband, bring the kid back. And that's something that things have calmed down, we're able to do. But it was not so viable, 2 months ago even, for Marcella and David.
Yeah, we're living in a new norm. And I think we all have to think a little out of the box. So when we think about the practice itself, the medical practice, every business we know has been affected. Revenue is down, less patients, less income. How does that affect the financials from your perspective, Avni?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, matter right now, because what's happening, as you said, JG, revenues may be down, expenses may be up, because if they're trying, on the path to reopening their practice, then they have all these different precautions that need to take. And it's really, there's a lot of uncertainty even coming up. Is there going to be a second wave? And, what does that look like? Will we need to close down again? So with all this uncertainty, the valuations of businesses are definitely suffering. And many times in divorce cases, especially if there is a business owner, they don't really want to give up their share of the business, and their partners may not want that to happen either. So if there is no other protection in terms of either, some kind of a reserve or understanding, what ends up happening is the partner who has the business gives up a share of some other assets to their spouse so that they can retain the business. Now, with valuations in flux and portfolio values in flux, because as we know, the stock market has been just on a roller coaster ride. So it really depends on what particular day you pick to value your portfolio assets.
Yeah.
And then how do you make that trade of giving up some of the portfolio assets so that you can get a good valuation. So, these things are happening now, slowly, but they're definitely happening.
Let's hit another case. Here we have, thank you both for that very valuable alert. Here we have Ted and the Archangel Michael. They owned a home in the Hamptons, and that's where I think a lot of people are, in a 3-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. 2 5-year-old twins. The Archangel Michael is a public school teacher, so we know he gets a juicy pension if he's there long enough. And Ted is an attorney at a boutique law firm. Last year, they rented out the West Hampton home, and they're going to continue with renters for the entire summer. It's good income for them. And the parties and their kids are living together in Brooklyn. Interesting times living together. They've consulted with their matrimonial lawyers back in January, and it's been agreed that when Ted and the Archangel Michael separate, the kids will primarily live with Michael, with Ted having some parenting time, assuming they could live together in the same quarters. So a couple of things here. Mike's reluctant to uproot the kids with the hopes that Ted will move out of Brooklyn very soon, quickly, hopefully. And Michael hopes to remain in the apartment long-term, but he, like everybody else, nobody knows the values. Ted has his concerns about his volatile income in today's economic environment, and can he maintain paying the child support and other support and maintenance that the Archangel Michael is seeking. And lastly, the parties refinanced the mortgage on the West Hampton house in December. They anticipated using the value for the refinance appraisal for purposes of the divorce. But now we live in a new world. We live in a new world. So what do you think of this case? What can you pick up?
Yeah, some of the interesting issues that this one presents, maybe a little less so here in July than we would have had up until a couple of weeks ago when the schools were in session, is you've got 2 parents who are trying to work and kids who really can't be left to their own devices. They can for little periods of time. 5-year-olds, you can put them in front of the TV, you can tell them to go play, but somebody's got to be in charge of them. Somebody's got to be making sure if they're in school that they're logging on, doing their lessons, etc. And so what I've seen a lot of parents in this situation doing is sort of working in shifts, with one parent saying something like, well, I'm in charge of the kids from 7 until 1, and then my spouse takes over at 1, and that's when I get to work. I work in the afternoons. So here you've got Michael, who during the school year would have had to have been on and working during school hours, and hopefully, assuming that he's doing Zoom classes, so hopefully the parents, that's something that the 2 of them could work out, is that sort of time sharing, and they that they can be collaborative on that. And frankly, it's one of the benefits of the fact that they're still living together. It makes it easier than if they were separate and the kids had to be getting back and forth between the 2 homes. Obviously, there's stresses of everybody living together, and when they do separate, there's new stresses like, how do the kids get from one person's home to another, especially if they're living a little bit of a distance apart and people are anxious right now about using public transportation.
Yeah. So are there financial issues that you can spot, Avni, in this situation that are relative and important?
I think there are a few. So, one of the biggest challenges we're seeing right now is just value of homes. When the parties refinance their mortgage in West Hampton, the values there were kind of, the market was on a downtrend, if you will. They weren't getting as much as you would have liked. And then suddenly in 3 months, the whole thing changed, where there's bidding wars going on in the Hamptons and any place really outside of the city. So what does it look like in terms of the value of their 2 homes? Even Brooklyn, there are places in Brooklyn that are not getting, that may have gone down really. And then there are others that have gone up significantly, depending on, any outdoor space that might be present in the apartment or they have access to. So there are all these different factors to think about, especially when it comes to the value of the apartment. And then again, if Michael was going to remain in the apartment when Ted has uncertainty around his income, what does support look like? Is there, can they come to an agreement today for what support might look like, and then have to change it in a few years because Ted's income is more certain later on? What about expenses? In Michael, with his public school teacher income, is he able to, even if there is support, is he able to have that income to maintain that home for himself and his children?
Yeah.
So with all these income uncertainties going on, the whole dynamic of what does the support look like, what is the expenses, what are the long-term prospects of the 2 parents really comes into play. And then again, there's always that question of what happens to the portfolio value. Are they doing any trades as far as those values and opposed to the values of the homes? So that's definitely in flux also. So yes, financially, for the long-term security of both parents, there are a lot of unknowns.
So
yeah, and I know we need to move on. I just want to add one comment on that scenario too, which is that I have done a couple of agreements recently where we have provided for a look back where real estate will be reappraised at some point down the road, where a party can choose to sell it, or it would be revalued in 2 years or 3 years, something like that. And that gives the parties some flexibility, but it does have the downside of keeping them tied together for a longer period of time financially.
I like that. I think that's a very wise idea. And in the last couple of minutes that we have, let's talk about this last scenario, because this is pretty much something that happened years ago. Here you have a situation where you have a couple, Joan and Kevin. They divorced 5 years ago. And prior to the divorce, Joan gave up her career in journalism when Kevin was offered a job that required him to move to the Big Apple from St. Louis. Joan re-entered the workforce in 2019, and unfortunately, due to COVID, she was furloughed. And, Kevin and Avni and I can attest to this. Our income is tied to the market. So market's good, we're doing great. When the markets are bad, we're not doing as great. So, in this case, they have 2 kids, 12, 15. They're attending private school in the Upper East Side, which we know costs moolah, boku bucks. And they're living near Joan's home, and Kevin lives up in Westchester. Kevin obviously wants to reduce his maintenance and support because he's thinking, the markets are going to tank, I'm going to lose money. And he does not want the kids going to private school this year because Dalton costs some money. And lastly, the children have been living primarily with Joan, spending alternative weekends with Kevin. And Kevin wants to have them with him more now that they don't need to be in a New York school. So from your perspective, what do you see here? What do you come up with? What issue?
This is a challenging situation that I certainly have encountered with many of my clients who said, well, we had this parenting schedule because the kids go to school a few blocks from mom's house, but now that they're going to school in their bedrooms, why don't they just come stay with me? And look, I've got all this green grass. They can come run around in between their classes. It's an ideal situation for them. And now you have Joan saying, well, I'm home all day and I don't have to work because I just got furloughed. why should they be spending time, at dad's house where dad's just sort of hiding behind a closed door doing his work all day? So when I've encountered these situations, I have encouraged my clients to be flexible, to listen to what do the kids want. Sometimes the kids are saying, yeah, I want to get out and be able to ride my bike. Or sometimes they're saying, no, I like it here and I want to stay in the city. So we've been encouraging the families to kind of work these things out, maybe do some sort of hybrid where there's a little bit more time at dad's, sort of extend the weekends. But as we're looking ahead to the fall, I think everybody's really wondering, what are schools going to say? Are we going to reopen for in-person instruction? And I'm working on a similar situation now where the Joan, in my case, is also saying, my lease is up and you're looking to cut my support and I got furloughed and I can't stay in the city. So I'm going down to Virginia where my parents are. And I'm just going to stay there. And if the school's open, they can remote learn. A lot of the New York City schools are saying that they are doing a fully remote option for the fall trimester. So I don't need to be around.
Yeah.
And you're not making it economically feasible for me to stay around. All these issues wind up tying back together.
Yeah. And Avni, from the financial standpoint, what do you observe here?
Yeah, the financial, there are a few implications. If the whole question about reducing maintenance and child support is coming into play, we have to think about, when originally this agreement was reached, Joan had a job and her support may have been dependent on how much income she was making. And now that job is no longer there, and who knows when she might get a job again. So, that's definitely something to keep in mind about when you're renegotiating or redoing a maintenance and child support agreement. I think the other piece is, if they decide that, they don't really need to go to private school because Kevin doesn't want to sign that contract, is there more funds available for some kind of additional support? So, 2 kids, that can amount to a pretty penny as far as annual expenses go. So is that amount now available? Even if Kevin's income goes down, that new amount might become available to help Joan with some of the additional expenses that she might have if she's forced to live in New York. And then, the other piece we have to think about, this was 5 years ago, so the tax implications are very different. Back then, Kevin, based on their agreement, Kevin could deduct the maintenance and Joan, the alimony, and Joan had to pay taxes on it. But that's no longer the case. So, there is a gray area of, if they have a new agreement, does the tax implication carry on? Or is there do they fall under the new laws? And since there's no case law yet, Karen and I, we talked about it. This is a gray area. There is no, there are no certain, you can't say for certain what's going to happen. It is definitely a gray area. So, there are a lot of different aspects. And then we have to think about Joan and where her long-term security is impacted if there is a change in her income.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead. I was going to add, from the legal standpoint, with respect to Kevin's desire to reduce his support obligations, I remember when all of the whole COVID started, I had a client reach out to me saying, as soon as the court's open, I want you to file a motion requesting that I can reduce my support. And I was like, come on, like, that's not going to be the judge's priority. And what about your assets? Just because your income is reducing does not mean that a court, on a temporary basis, does not mean that a court is necessarily going to grant you the relief of the right to reduce your support. We don't know what assets you have in the bank. We don't know how the court's going to look at the whole picture. And back to what we were saying before about access to justice, who knows how long you're going to get relief. And meanwhile, you still are under a court order to pay a certain amount of support. And if you withhold that, you're in violation of that court order.
Clearly, things are different than when divorce was normal in the past. We have a new norm for what divorce is. So in conclusion, let's wrap up with a couple of takeaways from your observation. I put up here what you all thought were the top issues of the day. You want to hit any of them more?
Yeah, the one I do just want to talk. It comes up. I know we're getting to the end of our time, but I think that last scenario also raised this issue regarding the relocation question, which is Joan saying, "Well, maybe I'm just going to move." And I tell clients all the time, the rules around the general rules around relocation in New York State, and that it's a best interest analysis. Courts look at a variety of factors that include psychological, include what's the access schedule, and include financial implications. And I tell clients, you can have the exact same set of facts presented to 2 different judges in New York City and get 3 different results in terms of whether the person who wants to move can. And I am really curious to see what's going to happen with people who have temporarily relocated outside of the city for COVID, and whether they're going to decide, I don't want to move back. And look, we've managed to make it work with Dad getting this much access over the past 6 months. Why should it matter? Why should I have to come back?
Sure.
I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something to think about. As I said at the beginning, any decisions, any big changes you're making to your agreement, or any big decisions you're taking based on what's going on today, think about the longer term implications of those situations, and talk to attorneys to build in, as Karen was saying, build in those clauses of revisiting them when you think that this may pass, or at a time when it makes sense. So, definitely think about that. And then alternative resources for resolution too. Karen mentioned, mediation as an option. There are certain specific issues that you might see in your cases that are more amenable to mediation, or getting a parent coordinator involved. Even in terms of financial issues, mediation may be an option depending on what's going on in the case. So there are other alternative resources that we're seeing being used.
Yeah, I would have to say, from hearing the 2 of you talk about divorce, in the best of times, even easy divorces require tremendous emotional endurance. The human brain can handle so much stress and uncertainty, but this one, I think, has thrown us completely over the edge. This was really very informative, very interesting from my perspective. Let's see if we, by the way, if anybody has questions or comments, let's see what we have. We have Karen's information up, we have Avni's, we have mine, but the real experts here are Karen and Avni, not so much me. So with that, let's take a look if we have any questions in the chat. Avni is the MTE2. There you go, CF. I love it.
Move for West, JG. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm from WS.
Maria Macron's raised her hand in the participants box, JG.
Okay. Let me see how I can unmute.
I unmuted myself.
Oh, even better.
Make it easy for you. I have a kind of a 2-part question. Karen, you were mentioning your client who asked, wanted to file right away for reduced child support, and obviously you were counseling your client not to. So I'm curious how your client reacted. And then for Avni, I would imagine you're also getting questions from parents about how they can, how they can also look at that, and how do you advise them in terms of their overall finances?
So Maria, the client who insisted back in March that I file this as soon as I can, when I explained to him that the court was going to look at assets and that we typically look at the last year's reported income, so we really can't do anything until 2021 when we see what he's earned for 2020, has managed to disappear again. So, I have no doubt he'll come back to me in December and say, look, my income went down 15% or 20% from the $2 million I earned last year. So I should get a 20% reduction in my support. And I'll have to explain to him that he'll spend more money fighting that motion than he'll wind up saving in the long run.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good question in terms of the financial piece. And, we have some very smart attorneys in the room. And before you get to that point of making a long-term change, our job is to advocate for our clients and demonstrate that if the support reduces by this much, this is the impact that it has on the long-term financial picture and the security. And the original agreement had certain assumptions built in, which is why it worked. But with the new assumptions, it may not work. So from our perspective, we advocate for our clients. And that's one piece of information the attorneys use to make their case.
Thank you.
I think Nancy had her hand raised.
Let's unmute Miss Nancy.
Thank you. I took care of it. Thanks. Thank you so much, guys. I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say. Very informative. I was curious to know whether there's anyone who practices matrimonial law who's on this webinar, whether they've had any better success at having access with the courts, because it is very frightening. In Westchester, it's very dependent on who your judge is and whether they want to hear the motion, frankly. But it's scary to think of that it's an emergency. They're supposed to be working. And, as you said, Karen, that your emergency order to show cause was stuck in the clerk's office. So one, is anybody having better success? And two, Karen, do you have any remedies in terms of how to get the clerk's office to communicate with the judge?
I will just say in that situation, it was an unfortunate case where the judge who was assigned for our prior post-judgment motion found this motion that we'd filed back in February frivolous. And I think she thought that because we filed it in February after there was an incident, and then COVID happened, and by the time the motion actually got before her, things had calmed down. So she was focused on the fact things are calm, there's no reason for you to file this, and not focused on the crisis that had happened in February. So then here I am showing up literally 3 weeks after I get this decision that says my motion in February was frivolous, saying Dad's withholding this stage 4 cancer child, depriving her of access to all of her services because he reads their parenting agreement one way, not their parenting order one way, when you have to read it this other way. And we requested a conference call because we know this judge wants conference calls before we file a motion. And we were told, this matter is considered disposed because it was a post-judgment motion, the case is closed, my earlier one. So we can't do a conference call on this. So you have to file a motion. So then, I have no recourse. The ex parte, the office that processes the motions before they get to the judge office, is saying, we have so many emergencies, we can't get to them all. And literally, then you have a holiday. So from my Monday at 6 p.m. filing, as of this morning, is still not at the hands of the judge. And we forwarded a copy to the court attorney saying, here's what we filed. Can we please have a conference call? And the court attorney said, thank you. We'll review it when we get it from ex parte. And my hands are tied. So we wound up, as I said, going to mediation. And the mediator said, I said, I can't send my client into a mediation in basically a hostage situation. Your dad's withholding the child. So dad returned the child like right before the mediation session. And yeah, I mean, it is really disturbing. That's a crisis. And then I can't even deal with the day-to-day, like that first scenario where dad's just saying, you're a doctor and I don't think you should be with the kids. And we just don't have the ability to deal with things. And I'm curious, there's some people here who are from New England, and I'm curious what their experiences are there also.
Any thoughts?
Any thoughts?
I'm from another planet. Westchester County, matrimonial floor is another planet.
Well, yes.
As those who visit us know, and it's a very strange place because I have a divorce case going on, and there's an issue of travel to a foreign country. It's not Europe, but it's a foreign non-Hague country. And the judge, even though the parties had entered into a custody agreement and a parenting agreement, they had not dealt with their finances, and the judge wanted to have a virtual hearing on this issue. And I was like, Judge, nobody's traveling. Why do we have to have a hearing now? So it's bizarre that on some level, they don't seem to have a set protocol, I think is the problem. Because even though they have these rules, that it really ultimately is up to each individual judge. And this is a topic we've been discussing up here, which is, are you required to attend a trial that is virtual? Do you have any recourse? They are now, I'm hearing they're calling people into court to have in-person trials. But what's your remedy? You don't show up and, then there's a default. So it's creating a lot of havoc. And so I have no answers for you, but I got lots of problems.
Well, and I think you're right that I do see this, like judges seem to pick and choose what they care about, what cases they care about, and the triage is just completely off.
Are court attorney referees working in Westchester again or no?
They are virtually. I have a PC conference scheduled that the court took it on its own initiative. This had been scheduled prior to COVID, and then it had been adjourned, and they just contacted us and said, yeah, we're going to have the PC. This is a preliminary conference. And so, yeah, the court attorney will be conducting that. So they're back and working.
And I'm curious if anybody's been confronting that issue that came up in scenario 3 about the relocation. The parties, somebody moving out of the New York City or area for, theoretically justified reasons now. More space, it's better to be out of the city during the heat of this crisis. And I have a couple where that's happening, and I'm worried people are not going to come back. And
well, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Karen, but there was an interesting case in New York where it was a lesbian couple, and the biological mom took the child to New Jersey. It was a reported case, and the biological mom took the child to New Jersey because she felt that the child was safer in New Jersey. And the court, I believe it was Brooklyn, said, no, there's no problem being in Brooklyn, and you got to bring the kid back. So I agree with you. I think this is a big issue, but I listen, you know, parent says they want to go somewhere else because it's going to be safer. The next thing you know, there's going to be an uptick in COVID in the new place. So,
Right, because everybody's going there. Yeah. But it's also, there's the short term, by doing this now, you're interfering with the access. But I'm concerned as I'm playing this out of what about the mom who wants to stay in Monroe County, New York? My kid can go to school remotely, so what if dad's in the city and this interferes with his access? And I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with those cases. So. And all of these financial issues are, you know, make my head spin too, but I feel like we've all had to become completely focused on the custody issues for the past several months. That's really been the forefront of all of this.
Have you had any judges enforce or support orders where the payor stopped paying? In other words, said, you know, it's COVID, courts aren't paying attention, or you don't have access, so I'll just stop paying support.
So I have not had any actual motion practice on that, but I have had it come up on conference calls, including with Nancy, the newish judge in Westchester, the woman.
Right.
Yeah, and she said there's an order. You have to follow the order.
yeah.
So I think they are.
Nancy, something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what about you, Alan, Evan, anybody?
The reaction I got was not good. It was in Westchester. I'm not going to say much more than that, but you know, it's hard because you've got an order from a court, got a client, and you know, the payor just says, well, I just don't have any money anymore, which is total BS. But you're really kind of stuck, and you're kind of hearing from the court, don't send us motions.
Right.
So it's like, what are you supposed to do?
Right. It's almost like they're saying, be big kids, figure this out. And it's like, well, that's what you're there for.
Yeah.
Right.
Karen, I had a similar situation to you. I filed an emergency motion on behalf of a client last week, and that motion is still sitting in the clerk's office as well. The court wouldn't entertain a phone conference either. And it puts all of us, you know, the clients, just in a very challenging and difficult situation. We tried to also go to mediation. It didn't work. So everyone's just trying to figure it out. I have a continuing virtual hearing in October, and I also have a hearing in family court, which I have found in New York County Family Court, the response from family court has been excellent on cases. I think it's judge specific as well. But when I had filed emergency motions in New York Family Court, the response has been quicker. But I do have a custody case that was adjourned first week in June to October, and the judge, as of now, is requiring that we appear in person middle of October. I mean, we'll see if that still happens. He's pretty adamant that we're going to go forward in person.
Wow.
Which is not, the case has been pending for 2 years, so it's not really an emergency. But
Good.
Yikes.